In a word, the comic book movie landscape coming into 2008 was met. The X-Men franchise's most recent addition was the disastrous X-Men The Last Stand in 2006. Spider-Man 3 gave the world emo, Peter Parker, and the world couldn't give him back. Batman Begins did a course correction for the character, after George Clooney basically killed the franchise with Batman v Robin. But The Dark Knight, the film that took Batman to a whole other level, hadn't yet been released. There was Daredevil. Well, you get the picture. So when Iron Man arrived in May of that year, it was a breath of fresh air in a genre that had lost its way, an ambitious film that promised something bigger. The MCU. In the 15 years since it was initially released, the multi-billion-dollar franchise that Iron Man helped in creating has lost what made it unique in the first place. How did it happen? The Marvel films released previous to Iron Man varied from Howard the Duck, which was awful, to Spider-Man 2, which received high praise. Iron Man, however, was unique since it was a Marvel movie made exclusively by Marvel Studios, giving them the authority to decide all aspects of its production. The movie had a big feel to it. It was an unrestricted, lavish extravaganza that had everyone's complete backing. The script, which had a straightforward good guy v. bad guy conflict, kept an admirable balance between comedy, action, and drama. The effects were a seamless combination of CGI and physical effects. In terms of live-action movies at least, Iron Man was a brand new character. A B-grade hero without adamantium claws or web-shooting abilities, the character wasn't at the top of anyone's mind. Robert Downey Jr., an actor who had just recently returned to the public eye after years of fighting addiction, was undeniably a major factor in the movie's success. Tony Stark became a fully formed character, instead of merely a one-dimensional tool for achieving an objective, because the guy oozed charisma and wit. Marvel, sensibly, chose not to fully commit to the MCU with the film, instead choosing to introduce the idea without overwhelming the audience with what would come next. Despite Iron Man 2 nearly putting the MCU to a screeching halt, Iron Man launched the MCU on a high note, and a new world of a connected cinematic universe took over. The MCU's Phase 1 kept things simple, introducing new characters like Captain America and Thor, before bringing them all together in 2012's The Avengers, which completely blew everyone's mind. The movie presented an extraterrestrial danger to Earth, but the theme was still very much one of white hat, a black hat, and it ended with the first appearance of Thanos, the main villain who would plague the MCU going forward. Beginning with Ant-Man's Quantum Realm and continuing with Guardians of the Galaxy's Cosmic Reaches, Phase 2 began to stretch the limits of the MCU. Marvel continued to capitalize on the MCU's advantages by maintaining a consistent narrative across the movies, adding characters that were unfamiliar outside of the comic book fandom to keep things interesting, and releasing their movies at a reasonable pace. With Black Panther delving further into the fictional nation of Wakanda, which was first featured in the epic Captain America Civil War, Phase 3 of the Infinity Saga further broadened the scope of the MCU. It's also the time when Thanos planned to use all 6 Infinity Stones to wipe out half of all life in order to create a better world in the future, is completely accomplished. The Infinity Saga was perfectly concluded with Avengers Endgame, the result of all the plotting since Iron Man, which included a fight sequence that exceeded all fan expectations. However, it's during this stage that the MCU starts to show signs of losing its way. Movies were released in a frenzy, with MCU movies arriving in cinemas within weeks of one another, with the gap between Captain Marvel's March 8, 2019 release and Avengers Endgame's April 26, 2019 release being the most problematic. It put a lot of pressure on the average moviegoer, especially since missing one release meant falling behind on key plot points. The notion of timelines and time travel through the quantum realm began to destroy the simplicity of the previous MCU films. Then there was the death of Tony Stark, who had become the undisputed face of the franchise. His sacrifice is what gave the finale of the Infinity Saga emotional depth that was previously lacking in the genre. It was an unavoidable conclusion, but the MCU was now moving forward without a character like Downey Stark. In the present, there are obvious signals that the franchise is getting tired. Movie posters for MCU films are all identical, with nothing noticeably unique from one another. The first set of movies' high quality took a hit with the release of Eternals, the MCU's first film to be certified rotten on the Rotten Tomatoes website, followed by a second, Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, released just under a year and a half later. The multiverse element took away what was once a fairly basic grasp of the broader story, replacing it with a complex plot gimmick that is difficult for the average moviegoer to understand. This brings us to another topic, the Disney Plus series. Since WandaVision, it is no longer enough for the casual fan to see MCU releases in theaters. The same viewer must also keep up with all MCU series on TV to understand what's going on. Imagine seeing Quantumania without knowing about Kang from Loki. The MCU's main flaw right now is its complexity, which will only get more difficult to manage with the arrival of the X-Men and Fantastic Four. Beginning with Iron Man, what highlighted the MCU was an easily understood storyline with top-notch visual effects. The story is no longer simple, and the visual effects have noticeably declined in quality. The MCU may have lost its spark, but it is not too late to bring back the magic. They must for the sake of the franchise's future. Thanks for watching. To catch all the latest from us, subscribe and hit the bell icon to get notified as soon as a new video drops. We'll see you in the next one.